Hello, everyone. It's Jennie and Laurie of AstroPath again, and we are here today to talk about the Aquarius full moon. Before we get into that, I just want to introduce us. Jennie is of Hidden Path Astrology. You can find her on her website at hiddenpathastrology.com. You can find me, Laurie, at astrolore.org. Go to our website, sign up for our newsletters, and do all the things. Subscribe to this channel. Thanks for being here, first of all. And please subscribe to our channel, share it with people, give us a comment, give us a like. All those good things will help us to grow here and continue to be here with these videos. And also, for those of you who have commented, thank you so much. It means a lot to us. It really does. So on that note, I'm going to turn it over to Jennie and let her talk a little bit about the phases of the moon and why the heck we talk about these things.
Well, today we're going to talk about the full moon in Aquarius. It's happening on August 1st. It's happening at 2:31 p.m. Eastern time. So adjust your time zone. And when we talk about the moon phases, we usually talk about it kind of like plants, the plant cycle, because it's a really easy way to understand it. The simplest thing to think of is the full moon is kind of like when you see the flower blossom, a big, beautiful flower. We get to see the big, beautiful full moon. So I always encourage people to get outside, take a look at it, pay attention to what it looks like, because it's really cool. And I know both of us are moon geeks, but anyway. So essentially this started with the new moon. This time it was a new moon in Cancer. It happened on July 17th. And this is the full moon that has grown out of that seed that is in the sign of Cancer, which is unusual. We don't always have such a different sign. So the Cancer new moon was this really nourishing time. And then a week later, we had the first quarter moon as a half moon. And then another week later, on August 1st, we have this Aquarius full moon. Another week goes by and we're in the last quarter phase. And that's when you're closing down the cycle. And in terms of the plants, that's when you would have harvested off all the fruit. And then the last part is just letting the rest of the plant go into compost to feed the soil for the next cycle. So that's essentially what we're looking at. So as a full moon, we are thinking about that beautiful blossom.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Absolutely. It's, full moons are always a time of celebration because it's that full expression of what began 2 weeks earlier. And like Jennie said, like you said, Jennie, get out there and look at the moon. It is a beautiful thing, and there's no excuse not to. It's summertime. Get out there, play under the full moon, dance around a fire, do something exciting.
Awesome.
So what are we going to talk about now? We want to talk about Aquarius itself?
Yeah, let's talk about Aquarius. And I did forget one thing in the cycle, which is that the longer cycles, you can use these cycles to look at an entire year. So if you're using those cycles, the new moon in Aquarius was on January 21st. So this is the full moon based on that. It's funny because whenever I hear those dates, I'm always like, what on earth was going on in January? I don't know. I'd have to look at my journal, but maybe you do know. So think about it and incorporate that. And now let's talk about Aquarius.
Yeah. And actually, I'm going to step back 1 second here as well and just say that, if you're really serious about studying astrology, keep a journal because it really is helpful to look back at these dates. And if you know what was going on at that time in January, and you can really, because it gives us more time. I mean, we can look at these little tiny cycles 2 weeks ago, the new moon, and now the full moon. But if we look back to that 6-month period, we can really see a lot more. So yeah, if you're serious, keep a journal. It's really helpful in so many ways as you study astrology. Yeah, so Aquarius, What's Aquarius about? It is, first of all, it is the fixed air sign, right? So what do those two things in themselves represent? Jennie, what do you think of as far as air and as far as fixed? How do they come together in this one sign?
Yeah, it's kind of funny because I actually do like to think in terms of those images. And when I think of Aquarius with those two things, I kind of just take my mind right up, way up high into the stratosphere, because the stratosphere is the layer of air that surrounds the Earth that is really stable. It's up too high to be affected by weather. And that's a perfect analogy for Aquarius, because Aquarius kind of has that ability to go way out, look way into the future, and be pretty unruffled, and to the point of in a good way, it can be kind of like non-attachment, where they're not getting all in a kerfuffle about other people's emotions. But if it's taken too far, it can be too detached. So I really like that as a symbol for Aquarius, to think about it in terms of that stratosphere, because Aquarius is futuristic, it's visionary, it's super inventive, and it has a real ability to think way outside the box in terms of solutions. And then, which of those solutions are actually employable? That's kind of the next part of it. But, just think in terms of that big, broad view, and super inventive and imaginative.
Yeah. Yeah. So that really, that's air. I mean, that is it's such a fascinating sign. And you bring in the fixed part and you really get the tendency of Aquarius to kind of get stuck in that expansive big view. It's such an interesting sign. I really, yeah, Aquarius.
Yeah.
I'm stuck here. All of a sudden, my words.
Well, you reminded me, Laurie, of part of what we're doing here is we're talking about the polarity. And so I think right where you took us to is that Aquarius can get so far out there that it's totally detached, but Leo is completely the opposite, where it's really warm and personable and friendly. And that's the benefit of the polarity, is that you can have this awesome futuristic view and all of these out of the box problem solving ideas, and then you can ground it right in the friendly, gregarious Leo nature, and be, attract other people to your ideas, and actually have really great conversations. And it kind of brings that real personal level to it. So I think they work really well together.
And
so,
yeah, the oppositions are always of the same modality. So these are both fixed signs. They're both very, determined, and have a lot of that fixed energy of keeping things going.
yeah.
Yeah. So that's one of the similarities between the two of them. Oppositions always have that similarity.
Yeah, and you're right to focus a little more on the fixed, because I think the challenge with fixed signs is they don't know how to jump the track. They get in a track and they stay there and they stay there and they stay there, which is great, because you need that determination in order to get anything done. It's super resistant and persistent, and it also can be totally relentless. And those things can all be very useful, but the trouble begins when you try to transition, and it's like, oh. And so I think sometimes fixed signs just have a really, really hard time prioritizing and understanding which thing they're supposed to do next once they have completed what's in front of them. And so that is really tricky. And this full moon polarity kind of brings that up. Yeah. So.
And one other thing I want to bring up about Aquarius itself is just that it is, by traditional rulership, it's ruled by Saturn. And those of you who came into the topic of astrology from the more modern perspective, think of Aquarius as the ruling planet. And to really understand Aquarius, it's really good to think of these as co-rulers. And initially, that can feel a little counterintuitive. You've got Saturn that wants to keep things a certain way and structure things, and then Uranus, which is all about change and upheaval and, moving things forward. So they seem a little counterintuitive, but if you really start understanding Aquarius, it really does hold both of those energies. Aquarius can get so into these unusual beliefs and ideas and detachment from what's, ordinary or, seemingly stable, that it gets into those areas, and then the fixity and the Saturn kind of will hold it there.
Yeah, that's a good point. I remember once hearing from another astrologer just the idea of Saturn being the wall, and that inside the wall is Capricorn, where there's all the rules and traditions, and it's very tightly contained. And then Aquarius is outside the wall. It's kind of like the outside, and that helped me understand it. But that Saturn is kind of holding the line there, and it is doing both. And that helped me understand the rulership. Because before that, it was like always thinking about Uranus as the ruler. And I do think Uranus has, depending on your point of view, it certainly has some connections you can look at with Aquarius. But it is a transpersonal planet. So that's always where I stumble into difficulty, because it's transpersonal, and it's not, I guess it kind of works with Aquarius in the sense that like, it's not so personable, but what happens when you have an Aquarius moon, and this is a conversation for another time, but just, you have to start, how do you take that giant concept and bring it into the most personal space of the moon? And that's why I think the Aquarius moon can be a really difficult placement in a natal chart. Yeah. But anyway, look at the other video for that, because we have videos for each natal sign. So.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Aquarius is a very interesting sign. And I think really thinking about that rulership, that co-rulership, really helps you understand some of the complexity of it. I have a brother who has a very strong Aquarius nature, and that really helped me understand that both, how both really work together in that sign.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, do you want to look at the chart and have a quick?
Oh yes, let's do that. Yeah. Let me wake up my computer here to open.
So the other thing I'll just add, as Laurie opens this, is that so an Aquarius full moon, in terms of mundane astrology, this brief moment in time where we have the moon in Aquarius, it's providing this real spotlight of objectivity. To me, that's the keynote. Is that Leo season as a whole there's a lot of fire. Because it's Leo, and that a lot of that is being squared by Uranus and Jupiter. So there's a lot of kind of jolting. And I find this Aquarius moon brings in this little spot of air, because there's nothing else in air happening here. And so it brings in this air objectivity that gives you a chance to get a little space from the intensity of, Venus retrograde, which is underground, and then all the Leo stuff squared by Uranus. And everything else is like water and earth. So air just gives you a break from all that. So this full moon is a break, a viewpoint. It's kind of like a break in the clouds where you're like, oh, that's the thing.
And that's, and that really ties in, or it just supports the celebration. The celebration of the full moon. This is a break. It's a break from the intensity. It brings in some relief, some ability to kind of separate yourself from all the drama and just go dance around a fire. Just enjoy it.
Yeah, I really see this as like a lift to your wings of just like, hey, you've been doing the work, you've had Venus retrograde, you're doing the stuff, all these things are happening, and then it's like, oh, but what's it all for? And this full moon just lets you see, it gives you this lift, and you can see the bigger picture. And, I think this is just a nice breath of fresh air.
Yeah. So some of the things to think about in looking at this chart, the chart of the moment of the full moon, is first of all, let's take notice of the fact that the full moon is squaring Jupiter. Now, that really gives a place of stability. It's sort of like you were talking about earlier, as we have this ability in the middle of this fire and all this intensity going on. We have this moment of air, this moment of kind of relief out of that, and the ability to kind of lean into this stable point. A square aspect is, we think of it as a challenge, as a difficulty, but it's also just something to pay attention to and work with. And when the square is to Jupiter, it's never going to be too terribly difficult. The most difficulty with Jupiter is a tendency to overextend oneself.
Right. Yeah. So I think this is a kind of a simple message. It's a simple message of don't lose touch with the ground. You know, like even as you expand and you have this wonderful objective view at the full moon, it's also grounded in practicality. It's grounded in something pragmatic if you take advantage of that Jupiter square and just kind of, it's pretty simple. I just think of it as like, are my feet literally on the ground, and then pressing into both feet and standing there. And then when you do that, you know exactly how far you can extend without falling over, because that's really what you want to do. I mean, falling over isn't the worst thing in the world, but really what you're trying to do is expand your point of view and get this insight that is also practical, that can be employed practically, that isn't just like way too out there, that it's just not even workable. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of what I think of with this.
Well, one of the things, as you were talking about it, you know, I said earlier about a bonfire, dancing around a bonfire. Well, in this, with that Jupiter squaring it, step aside from that, step away from the fire and feel your feet on the ground. Look at not only the full moon, but the entire view of all the planets up there. And really, yeah, just that's sort of, yeah, the celebration. Step aside, feel your feet on the ground, look around, enjoy that expansive view.
Yeah. I know we were prepping for this and I was totally thinking about I do yoga, you know, I practice yoga. So I was thinking about those yoga poses where you're like standing on one foot and your arms are outstretched and you're just at the tipping point of your balance. But the whole key is to press further down into the one standing leg and extend everything out further, and then you access your strength and you don't fall over most of the time. But it really is like that pose. It makes me think of that, you know, as if the sun and the moon, where your two arms outstretched, and then the Jupiter's the one leg. I mean, that's the image here, and that's the image it brings up for me. And it's just a wonderful extension available. So
yeah. That's great. Okay, the other thing we want to talk about in looking at this chart itself is to think about, here we are at the full moon. 2 weeks ago, we had the new moon. The new moon was here in Cancer, and the moon itself, since that point of that new moon, the moon has traveled through Leo, Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, Capricorn, and landed here in Aquarius. So to really think about the path that the moon has traveled and what energies it has picked up along the way in order to reflect back. I like thinking about it that way. And you can see that what the moon has picked up is all the personal planets, all the energies from the personal planets, Venus, Mercury, Mars. It picked up those energies, it moved along, and then right before coming to rest at the full moon, it picked up the intensity of Pluto. So, you know, thinking about it as a pathway, and then it's going to go on and connect with these other planets before it reaches the next new moon. How do you think about that pathway, Jennie?
Well, what I think is interesting, you just mentioned how the moon picked up all these personal planets. Well, not only did it pick up personal planets, but they're all in the personal signs. The first half of the zodiac tends to be the more personal half, where you're really pertaining to the self. So I see this as picking up all that personal stuff, both sign-wise and planet-wise. And then it comes to Pluto. And Pluto is as transpersonal as it gets. I mean, Pluto is way, 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 way out in the solar system. And it really refers to these, you know, I don't know, these intense, grinding, transformative processes that we're witnessing. And as humans in our human lifespan, we can only grasp these little tiny segments of the massive change that's really happening. So it kind of takes all that personal stuff and goes, hey, first of all, I'm going to transform it so that you can see that your story and your one thread is woven into the fabric of everything else, and that you're completely part of that much, much bigger picture, you know. And then it brings you into this Aquarius full moon where it says, and then you can see it and you're like, hey, and that's part of the objectivity is getting out of your personal story, your personal skin, and being able to see the bigger picture and see where it fits in. And that helps you it releases some of the suffering because you see there's more meaning, which is one of the major psychological things that helps reduce suffering. And it also just allows you to see how other people's stories fit into the grander picture. So it is a very objective moon, even more so. That's how I think of it.
Yeah, and it's so interesting right now because Pluto is so powerful right now. It's been doing this little back and forth here between Aquarius and Capricorn, which it's going to continue doing until late 2024. So it's in a very, very powerful position as far as none of us can avoid the cultural world transformations that are going on right now. So bringing this awareness and understanding of how our personal stories are attached to the bigger transformation of humanity itself is a part of this story. It's really interesting how that is showing up in this chart.
Yeah. The other piece too is that we both observed that at the next moon phase, which is the last quarter moon phase, that moon's going to be right next to Jupiter. So what this does for in my mind is it kind of, I was thinking about how earth signs have gravity on their side, like it's the earth, it draws you in. We're all stuck to the planet because of gravity. And it's almost like, Jupiter's drawing the moon in, kind of saying, come on, come over to me. And like, let's get really, really grounded and like, just come and snuggle up, really kind of draws that in and helps stabilize it. So which is great because right after that, the moon will conjunct Uranus, which brings in much less stability. So there's this kind of funny dynamic I see happening in this chart. And we'll talk a little bit more about where the moon ends up at the new moon in Leo, which happens at the end of the season. So
it is that watching the travel, the pathway of the moon is so interesting at this time. So pay attention to that. And is there anything else we want to say before we get into just the personal pieces here?
No, I think we've rattled on enough about the full moon.
I think we probably have as well. We tend to do that. Okay, let's move on. I've got to close these. Okay, so now, for those of you with Aries rising, this full moon is really highlighting the polarity between the 5th house and the 11th house. So over this past period of time, since the sun had moved into Leo, our attention is so much in that area for you with Aries rising of your creativity, how you give of yourself. This is where there's just been a lot of energy, but at this point, you kind of have this moment of clarity, this moment where you can really get an objective view of all that heat in your creative area by paying attention to community. What is your community? These two, this polarity is just so interesting. The 5th house being so much where we give of ourselves, and the 11th house where we receive from community. So that's where there's a lot of attention. And for you, make sure you've got that fire and your community and are really able to celebrate how your community supports your creativity.
Yeah, and in this case, excuse me, my throat's a little scratchy there. In this case, like that, it's your community that's helping provide you with a sense of objectivity. It's as you immerse yourself in the community that you can get that breath of fresh air and be like, okay, because it may feel fairly heady and intense down in that 5th house. I mean, it might be something to do with if you have children, or not maybe your own or someone else's. There could be a lot going on in that area, or in your creative processes, or in some way that you're trying to decide if you should take a certain risk or not, or maybe you already took the risk and you're dealing with the aftermath, So those are some of the things that might be kind of making you feel a bit, fiery or kind of stuck in that area of your life. And meanwhile, it's the community. Go out in the community to get the sense of objectivity. That's going to provide you with this much broader view.
Yeah, it's really, as you were talking about that, I'm thinking, Venus is retrograde in that sign where the sun is. So there is a lot of challenge going on there. And this full moon does open that window of here you can see more clearly what your path of working on that that retrograde Venus is as well.
Yeah.
That's
Yep. And the key word is receptivity, being able to receive what the community has to offer you in terms of support. So
yeah.
great. No.
Get your support, get your objectivity from your community. And now we're going to move on to those of you with Taurus rising.
So Taurus rising, the Leo season brings your focus right into your family, your home, hearth and home is what I think about with Leo in the fourth house. And there's been a theme around having to kind of tend the inner fire with whatever's going on with your fourth house. So also remember, this can have to do with your ancestors. And this also can be your physical home and your connection to the land that you spend your time on, that your home is situated on. So while all that's going on and there's a real focus there, this Aquarius full moon brings in this, I don't know, a break from all of that. It's kind of like you get to go to work and get a break from the more intense flames that are going on in the fourth house. So, whenever you're feeling overwhelmed or too much or whatever, this is a perfect opportunity to bury yourself in your work, to just allow work to give you the objectivity, to put set the other stuff aside for a moment, and that's just really going to help lift your spirits. It's going to help you catch a break. That's basically what's going on with this chart. So
yeah, that's lovely. Yeah, pay attention to where there's so much going on in that home and how you can get out in the world and take a break. Exactly. I think you said everything that needed to be said about this one. I don't have a thing to add. So now we're going to move on to those of you with Gemini rising. And this, first of all, we want to focus on where the sun is, because that's where all the heat and energy is going on at this point in time. This is in the area of your communications. It could bring in issues of siblings, neighbors, your day-to-day kind of the environment that you're in. So there's a lot of heat and energy in that area. And you want to look to the area of Aquarius, the 9th house, for the objectivity at this point in time. So you want to really think about this polarity. This, like I said, this area, the 3rd house, is about your communication. The 9th house is your wider world view, how you really understand the bigger issues of the world. So that area is around travel, education. It's all the areas of your life that really broaden your perspective, your worldview. So it's in your worldview that you are able at this time of this full moon to really get some objectivity on the heat in your communication. So step back if you're feeling frustrated or there's just challenges going on in that area with your siblings or your communications. Step out and take a look at the wider view. That's where you're going to get some relief.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and part of it, just with the full moon, and as Laurie, as you're saying, like giving you that objectivity, it's also allowing you to kind of see how part of your path is about communication. I mean, with Gemini rising and with your sun ruling that 3rd house, there's a big theme here for you about how important your communication is and how that is how you really shine your light out, is through your words. So this is just a really nice opportunity to get, as you said, step back and see that bigger picture. So yeah, really interesting time for you.
Yeah, thanks for saying that, Jenny. I think it's so important for us to really keep in mind and remember that wherever Leo is in anyone's chart, no matter what sign your sun is in, your sun, the core of who you are, shines the brightest in that area. So that area of communication is so important if you have Gemini rising. Okay, so let's move on to those of you with Cancer rising. So this puts the focus of the Leo season in your 2nd house of money, resources, your own self-worth profile, how you feel good about yourself. That's what that second house is really about. So there's a lot of heat and a lot going on in that area at this point in time. The full moon puts the attention, brings your attention, draws your attention into where you can get a little objectivity from other people's values and issues. So you want to kind of go into a consideration of other people's deep issues here. This one's a little tricky to me to think about. Why don't you talk about that a bit here, Jennie? Because
I think
this one you would understand.
Yeah, this is my rising sign. So, but it is interesting because first of all, I want to say, the second and the eighth houses are not the easiest houses, but they do both pertain to your resources. They do pertain to a source of power, personal power, shared power with other people. And I think that alone says a lot about, there's some stickiness here. And so, yes, as Laurie, as you're saying, like all that attention is on your self-worth, like the value you bring, the financial situation that you have, and so on and so forth. And I just think that the full moon gives you a break from all that. It shines a light on like, well, what about other people's stuff? What are other people struggling with? Like, what are their issues? And it really allows you to be like, oh yeah, I'm not the only one. Like, I'm not the only one who's dealing with self-worth stuff. I'm not the only one, it kind of brings in that like ability to just see into other people's stuff. And it's very helpful. I mean, it allows you to go, okay, this is just a process I'm in, and everybody gets a turn is kind of I end up feeling. So, but as you do this work, it's worthwhile because you're tapping sources of power within yourself and in the way you relate to other people.
It's so great to think about that, because wherever Leo is, regardless of what sign your sun is in, you are going to have a pathway, an opening in this house to express yourself very fully, because that's what house your sun rules, regardless of what sign it's in. So always, it's interesting with Cancer rising, how you are fully expressed in that house of your self-worth and how you spend and make money. These things are really important to people with Cancer rising, and really understanding that ability to go out and look in the area of other people's values to get some objectivity on your own. That's interesting. Okay. Yes. So let's move on to those of you with Leo rising.
Yeah, so Leo rising brings, well, first of all, the Leo season is really firmly, strongly focused on you. The first house is, in essence, the self. It refers to kind of your overall life path, which is, for you with Leo rising, you have a job to radiate out your energy for other people. I mean, you are a beacon for other people. So that's something you need to really work with as Leo rising. And you also especially need to be careful with this Leo season. Just, this is a great time for a little bit of an ego check. Like, and when I say ego check, what I mean is, do you feel connected? Because when you feel disconnected from people, that's when you might get confused and think, wow, I'm so awesome. Or it's opposite, which is, God, I really suck, And so I think it's a really important time to like recognize that those polarities are, they're sort of falsehoods. So that's a really important thing to think about during this Leo season with Venus retrograde as well. And then the Aquarius full moon is like, oh, okay, great. Now you can get this perspective. It might be through your partnerships if you are partnered. It might be from a one-on-one conversation that you have with somebody, but there's this really great perspective available that lifts you out of that very sort of self-oriented focus that Leo season brings. And, it's always funny with the 1st and the 7th, because all of us as human beings, we all project our stuff onto other people. It's just a part of what we do. It's how we learn. It's how we understand. So you in particular, Leo rising, have some, I don't know, some work to do, maybe a perspective to really grasp around, what do you project on other people and what's going on in your partnerships. So.
Yeah, it's such an interesting. I always love looking at that, the first and seventh, as a polarity, because those two signs always on the first and the seventh are going to be in the same modality. So there's just that similarity between them, and yet they're always so profoundly different. And how you see yourself and how you see the person that you're in relationship with is such a different view. So yeah, there's that personal me. I am Leo. Wherever your sun is, regardless of what sign your sun is in, it rules your first house. You are very clearly expressed through your personality. And then in relationship, you draw in this person or these relationships that are quite cool in comparison, that are quite cool. And you kind of see that reflection between the two of you. It's such an interesting journey here to look at relationship.
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought the modality. I'm just going to make one other comment, because it does suggest you have a very fixed view of what you and your relationships are supposed to be. And so there might be some work around, like, as you gain that perspective, what could shift in that department a little bit. That's something to think about.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So let's move on to those of you with Virgo rising. This puts the Leo sun right there in your 12th house. It's an interesting place to try to shine your light through the 12th house. The 12th house, this really brings in a lot of attention at this period of time to your subconscious, your unconscious patterns of thinking, or possibly on a level of your spirituality. There's a lot of attention in that area, in a very quiet internal area for you at this period of time. And in order to get a more objective view of what's going on in those deep inner recesses, you really need to get an objective view through your day-to-day routines. Pay attention, notice how your routines pull you out of that personal exploration in your internal self. So there's really a need to pull yourself out and pay attention to what your routines are and how you're using those as a breath of fresh air to understand what's going on in there. Wherever your sun is in your chart, regardless of what sign it's in, you're a person who really does shine brightest all alone with the doors closed in your own mind, meditating or exploring your own unconscious. That's where you function the best.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting as you're putting it like that, because I was thinking about, well, what kinds of habits, routines, practices might we be talking about with Aquarius? I mean, as an air sign, I think there's some kind of focus on communication, whether that's a daily journaling practice that is part of your habit, or more that you engage with kind of like-minded souls through your, maybe you go on a walk with kind of a different friend, every other week or something like that. Like that would be a habit or a routine that is about your health. So I think there's something important, because there's so much focus behind the scenes there's a sense of isolation, to ask yourself, like, is there a way you can connect with some kind of unusual souls through those habits and practices? Is there somebody that you talk to on a weekly basis, perhaps, or something like that? But I was thinking, like, those are some of the things you want to think about for your habits and routines. Like, how are they intellectually functioning?
Well, as you were saying that, I was thinking of, you said unusual souls. And I was thinking of channeling. To me, that's right where it went. Is like, oh, the routine of channeling information.
Yeah. That's actually a really great way to think of this polarity in the 6th and the 12th.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny having your sun ruling the 12th house. I mean, it's kind of at odds with the Virgo, the practicality service orientation of Virgo, and so I think there's What an interesting placement to really have to be like, oh my God, I have to think about these hidden things, which is so un-Virgo. So
yeah. And then the routines being Aquarius, it's very un-Virgo. It's very un-Virgo. But I think channeling is a great way to utilize this.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to those of you with Libra rising.
Oh, yeah. So Libra rising, this Leo season is all about your community. And again, let's remind ourselves, community is about those people who support you. They may not be super familiar people, or they might be. It can be both. But at any rate, with Libra rising, there's something really wonderful that feeds your soul about the groups you hang out with. I mean, I just think Libra is such a social sign. And to have your sun ruling the 11th, because that's what Leo pertains to, is just, it really speaks to the social desires and the social needs, and that there's potentially a real sweet spot and perhaps some challenges to do with your community. And so in the meantime, this, Aquarius full moon is really putting a focus on your creative pursuits. So it's sort of like, if there's some weird feelings about your community, maybe there's some intensity there right now with Venus retrograde in your 11th house, then go and immerse yourself in your creative pursuits. Go and, go to the pottery studio, go and do, life drawing out in the park, or whatever the thing is that you like to do, or, might be playing with your friends' kids or something like that. But tap those, because that's going to give you objectivity. That's going to give you a sense of lift and give you a little bit of a break from whatever things are going on in that 11th house that perhaps feel a bit inflamed somehow.
Yeah. So things in that 11th house might feel a little inflamed right now. With Venus retrograde there's a lot of reevaluation going on, but wherever Leo is, your sun, regardless of what sign it's in, rules this area. So it's such an important area for you. And that polarity, I love that polarity. It's one of my favorites, just thinking about it as where you receive from others in the 11th house and where you give in the 5th. So yeah, when there's a challenge between those two, when the challenge or the heat is in the 11th house, just like you said, just go and find a way to express a coolness in your creativity. All those things you can do. And play with your friends' kids. It's a little more detached than if it was your own.
Yeah, it's a good point. Yeah. And like just tapping that, I don't know, fun child energy.
Yeah. Go do something fun. Go play. This is a time of getting out of the intensity of trying to reevaluate your community. Get away from that a little bit and just go play. You really need to take some time away from the heat and go have a little fun. So there you have it. Now we're going to move on to those of you with Scorpio rising. This puts all the issues that are going on in Leo up in that 10th house. So there's a lot of heat and attention has been being paid to your career, your vocation, your reputation, how you're seen in the outer world. You may feel like, there's just a lot of attention in that area right now. So the way to give yourself a break, to get some objectivity, to get a little bit of relief from the heat, is to really tap into some of the members of your family, perhaps. Family, home, there's some area of coolness that you can find in that home area, maybe ancestrally based. But that's really what you need to do to take a break from the heat out in the world. Go take a rest at home with your family members.
Yeah. It's funny, as you're talking, I'm thinking about a friend. Someone I know is Scorpio rising, and it's really interesting because I know there's a lot of questions around the career, like at this point in their lives, like, is there something that needs to be different? And that's that reevaluation of Venus retrograde. And so it's kind of like, does my career feed me? Does it support me in radiating out all this amazing Leo energy? And it's such a crucial question, because whatever your sun sign is, as you mentioned, like it rules this area. And then meanwhile, I just talked to this person recently, and they were able to find this old house and they bought it. And it's this bringing them this like objectivity of this, because the house is something that needs fixing up, and it's going to be something that's helpful down in the future. And I was like, oh my God, this is so Aquarius. Like, this is this idea of like, oh, so I have this future place that's providing me with a sense of objectivity. So if I just, keep figuring out how to work in my profession, and, maybe it's something to do the financial piece, then there's this like awesome place that's available to me. So I really like that. It's just kind of this, it's a good example of like how something at home can provide you the perspective, something to do with your roots or where you live, so.
That's awesome. That's great. And, I mean, other ways that it could show up is just getting the objective perspective of a family member could also be, so with the fourth house, it's like everything in astrology, it's a symbolic language. So there's layers and layers of meaning to that symbol. It might be about the actual home itself, or or the family, or anything along that line, the ancestral roots. That's fascinating. That's a good example. Okay.
No, you mentioned earlier something about channeling in a different one in the 12th house. And I was thinking, gosh, channel your ancestors.
Yeah.
So
That's true. That's true. There may be a long gone ancestor that has a good perspective on what changes you need to be making in your career. There you go. Okay, so now we're going to move on to those of you with Sagittarius rising.
It was with Sagittarius rising, this Leo season has really taken place in the area of life that refers to your worldview. This is your ability to think critically. This is your ability to go out and have experiences that really open up your perspective. And also with Sagittarius rising, I always just think that your 9th house is so important, because it's kind of like you're the perennial student as Sagittarius rising, and that feeds your ability to, quite honestly, be a teacher to other people. So there's something about student teacher. Maybe that's a topic that's coming up right now during Leo season with Venus retrograde there. You're having to kind of look at just overall your worldview, and maybe you're questioning something about it. So about your role. So check that out. And then meanwhile, just enjoy this full moon. I mean, this full moon for you falls in your 3rd house. So that means you have a sense of objectivity that's coming through, just kind of like your daily logistics, like as you transport through the world, as you take little short trips, which is what the 3rd house can mean. But also how you communicate, like that's a bright spot. Maybe that's how you ask for the space that you need, or maybe that's how you connect with that cashier in the grocery store who has this really cool perspective that you never even thought of. Mm-hmm. So I think this is a super fun polarity. This is a very learning oriented, which as Sagittarius rising, you're just going to soak this right up. I mean, this is a wonderful opportunity for this little nugget of wisdom that might come your way. So
yeah, I really like that. And when you were talking about it, this is such a student teacher kind of issue here. And when you were talking about the teacher position, I'm thinking about that moon there in the 3rd house as the moon being the student, the perspective of the student that teaches the teacher so much. I mean, if you've ever, and those of you with Sagittarius rising, I suspect have probably been, whether, officially a teacher or not, you've been in that role of teacher many times in your life. And anyone who has been in a role of teacher knows that their greatest teaching comes from their students. And this really does highlight that a lot. I think that's really interesting. So pay attention, no matter where your sun is in your chart, you shine the brightest there in that 9th house, in a teacher, student, explorer role.
Nice.
Okay, so we'll move on now to those of you with Capricorn rising. So if you've got Capricorn rising, all of the issues of this Leo season are there in your 8th house. So there's a lot of a lot of heat and a lot of attention right now on the area where you relate to other people on deep topics. The eighth house is kind of a tricky one to think about because it's not simple. It's not like, oh, it's your relationships or it's your, home. This is an area where you are navigating deep issues between yourself and others. We deal with things like our boundaries here in the eighth house. We deal with where we share resources with others and other people's values. So there's a lot of heat there. You're really navigating a lot with Venus retrograde here at this point in time. Also, you're really re-navigating how you manage yourself in the face of those deep issues with other people. So that's pretty intense. And this is a place that that you have a particular concentration of your energy there, because no matter what sign your sun is in, it expresses itself most fully here in the eighth house. So in order to get some perspective, which you're going to need, you're really going to need some perspective. You want to really kind of pull out and think about your own simple values. What is important to you? Getting away from all this complexity about other people's values and getting clear on your own objective values. So pull in and look at things from that perspective.
Yeah, nicely put, Laurie. I think that's a really great way to explain that, and just to kind of, yes, to focus in on, keep it simple with your own values. Because I mean, you're right about the eighth house is tricky. And I was thinking two things about it. One is that it's kind of like the iceberg, where you see the tip of the iceberg, and then there's all this stuff underneath in the ocean that you just cannot see. And that's what you're, as two people, or, you're bumping up against each other's kind of hidden iceberg stuff in the eighth house. And the second piece that goes on is, it can be sort of, I don't know, some more random people, but it also can be your intimate partnerships, where you start bumping into deeper stuff. Like, so that whole idea of like how the first 6 months are like, yay, and then you start bumping into each other's patterns and habits. And it is about 6 months usually. And that's eighth house material. So it's very important work. It's fruitful work. As you go through that eighth house, it allows you through into just a much deeper relationship. And it definitely has to do with having to deal with your vulnerabilities, which is so interesting, because you're right. Like that second house, just getting that perspective of like, what are your values? How do they connect to your vulnerabilities with other people? And just give yourself that bright spot to just, I don't know, take a new breath.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Really...
Perspective. It's all about perspective. So let's move on to those with Aquarius rising.
So the Aquarius rising, the Leo season's taking place in your house of partnerships. So this might be a time where you're reevaluating not just your partnership, but who you are in your partnerships, and wondering what you really want, and kind of coming to grips with that. And this is a very, very important question for those of you with Aquarius rising, because no matter what your sun is in, what sign it's in, it's still in charge of that seventh house, because it rules it through the sign of Leo. So, no matter what, this is a super important part of your life. And so if you're asking yourself questions like, what's going on with my partnership, or why can't I find a partner, or what's going on with this partner, you're in the right place, because it's Leo season. And what's really nice is that when that full moon hits on August 1st, you just have this really great view directly into that relationship. And what you get to see is, you're going to get this view of like how you are in that relationship. You're going to have this potential to have this real clear understanding, and objectively what is going on in the relationship. So I don't know, this could be a very useful moment in time. So I hope that you take advantage of it.
Yeah, it really is a time to kind of pull back from all the intensity and all the questions about my partnership or my partner, or what that means. And it's not necessarily your romantic or partner or your spouse. It can be a business partner. It can be a really, really close friendship that's signified here. But to kind of pull back from that and just go into yourself, find a simple detachment and pay attention to who you are in a separate but connected position. It's just getting perspective, getting your own perspective of who you are separate from who you are in partnership. And that's a little tricky with this, with Leo ruling your 7th house, because you do express yourself so much through that area. It's a time, I would say this Aquarius full moon for you is a time to just take some time to yourself.
I think
to
that's
really understand who you are as an individual, as a unique individual. Okay, perfect. Let's move on to those of you with Pisces rising. And this puts the focus of this Leo season in your 6th house, which is the area of our lives that it seems kind of simple, but boy, it takes up our lives, right? It's like the day-to-day routines that fill our lives, the day-to-day routines that support our physical being. It's just our routines, how we function in the world. It often relates to things like our dietary routines, or how we take care of our health in dietary issues, exercise. It also often relates to the pets in our lives. So this is an area that is surprisingly important for people with Pisces rising, because Leo is in this house, regardless of where your sun is. Your sun is in control of this 6th house through rulership. So it's a really important area. And at this point in time, with Venus also retrograde in Leo, you're really reevaluating all these routine processes that you live with. You might be thinking about changing up your routines in a big way. Well, right now, for this full moon, kind of give yourself a break, give yourself a new perspective, go into a understanding, kind of spend some time alone with yourself, looking at your own internal patterns and considering them from a very objective viewpoint. That will give you a clearer understanding of how to work with these patterns.
Yeah. I think all of those things are super important, and I was thinking too, it's funny. So with Pisces rising, I always just think this, it means that your interface with the world, there's a real sensitivity here, with the water sign, especially Pisces on the ascendant. And so what that suggests to me is like part of the whole key for all of your things as Pisces rising is getting those routines sorted out, because they're really going to support your health. Because with that much sensitivity, you're going to have to consider your health. Like you're going to have to consider how the things that come into you affect you. And so it's an important thing. And especially, I don't know, it just makes perfect sense to me that Leo is going to be on the 6th house cusp of like, where it's extra, extra important that you get those routines in a place where they really serve you, where they really work for you, and they really help you stay grounded, centered, focused, all those things, and then but then the funny thing is, it is kind of hilarious having this total detached objectivity when it comes to like the big picture spirituality. I mean, it's kind of perfect for Pisces rising, where it's just like, you have, because you're so used to being immersed in that, you actually have this wonderful viewpoint that you can access, and truly you can access it at any time. And this Aquarius full moon is reminding you of just how much clarity you can really have in this very difficult to understand part of life. Right. So it's actually, I sort of see this as like you're being served a reminder for that clarity that you have.
So. it brings in the channeling thing again.
Totally. It does.
It's like thinking about that 12th house as the area where you can open that door in the back of your mind and let information in. So it's that information that you can let in, that you can open that door, let that information in, that can give you the objectivity to, the perspective that you need at this moment.
Yeah.
So celebrate that, open that door back of your mind, those of you with Pisces rising. And I think that brings us to the end of this.
Yes.
And we did it, Jenny. We talked about all 12 of them.
All right. Well, thank you for watching the video. Do check out the Venus retrograde video for more information.
Yes.
That's going to help you understand more about your rising sign. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. And thank you, Jenny.
Okay. Bye.